IIT kindly be on the dais. Professor B.N. Nanda, VC, VSSUT Burla, to kindly be on the dais. Professor D.P. Chand, Director IGIT Saran, to kindly be on the dais.
Chairman AICT, Professor Nanda, our Vice Chancellor VSSUT Burla, then Professor Sarangi, our Director IIT Rourkela, and Professor Chand, Director IIT Saran. May I request to kindly present bouquets to our esteemed guests. Also, I welcome to all very esteemed and respected guests joining this meeting, this conference on higher and technical education, the representatives from various engineering colleges, principals, administrators, and polytechnics, government engineering colleges, private engineering colleges, government polytechnics, private polytechnics, and from print and media representatives, and ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I thank first the organizers, the EU-ISA organizers, for keeping a separate track on technical education, and that provided an occasion to deliberate on technical education. Now a lot of things happening in technical education. So I think it's an occasion where the very learned people who are very highly experienced in education, they should sit together and deliberate, because the whole day, I think that should throw some light how, and when the EU-ISA interacted with us, that on 24th year 72 took place, then we saw a lot of enthusiasm, and we eagerly participated, and we tried to invite a lot of guests from all the fields, all the important stakeholders like AICT, UGC, MBA, reputed institutes like IIT, NIT, all the engineering colleges, polytechnics, and we got very encouraging response. Some very senior officers from other people could not come because of their own preoccupations. But at least now we are happy that Professor S.S. Mantha, Chairman IICT is here, Dr. Sunil Sarangi is here, NIT, and our Vice Chancellors and various engineering college principals, polytechnic principals are here. So I think we should use this occasion to deliberate on the very important matters, the whole day session. So this is welcome. So why is this conference week? I will not talk much on engineering and technology, because there are many esteemed people there to talk on engineering and technology. I will not talk much on that. The basic purpose of any, if you go, why you are running our institutes? See, the basic purpose, if you start from the civilization, the basic purpose of anything to add to the national wealth. And if you recall, if you have studied economics, some of you must have, because most of engineering, the very definition of what is national wealth. So it was defined by Robert Turgot, a French economist in 1760. And that is still very important, and that is still accepted by the leading economists. It says that the national wealth is the present value of net revenue from land, because that time land was important, plus the stocks of movable goods. And the present definition is slightly different. The present definition says that the national wealth is the present value of net revenue from all goods and services. So some of our misnomer that national wealth means a lot of investments, like this hotel, or like a big university, like a big college, but that is not a national wealth, unless until that provides services, unless until that provides some usable services. Just doing a big building, just doing a big hotel, just doing a big bridge or big hotel is not a part of national wealth unless until that delivers some services. Why I am highlighting this? Because it's my own experience in last 2 years. On investment sector, we are not lagging behind. We have invested a lot. Like I've seen huge, a large number of private engineering colleges, our own government engineering colleges, diplomas. Investment is not lagging, but lagging is what we are producing, what the services is coming. So unless until you produce the right services, usable service variety, you are not adding to the national wealth. So that's how we should deliberate how our ultimate purpose is to add to the national wealth. Investment is important. At the backbone of that investment lies the capital, as the economist says. And the capital, physical capital, financial capital, and one more capital, human capital. And that human capital is added by you people. We are facilitators. So to make this capital more productive, which can add more revenue, more services, it is important to make it more qualitative and which can add. And nowadays technical education is getting more important and important. Earlier hardly in higher education sector 5 to 10% people were seeking technical education. Now I think Professor Mantha should agree, it is around 25 to 30% enrollment of higher education is in part of technical education. So now imagine if you are taking care of 30% of the people, how important we are, how much society's obligation on us, that we are responsible, accountable for 30% of that human capital. And if you not make that capital productive, then ultimately we will be held responsible. So it is very important and accountable us that we should make that human resource which we are providing to be more productive, more usable. One more important part of this education, that whatever education you are providing, it has 2-3 characteristics. One, it is a terminal education. There is no education beyond that. You are preparing a person for a career. Hardly 5 to 10% people go for further research and PhDs and all. So once people pass out from your after BTech, MTech and PhD, they are ready for a job. You are making people for the career preparation. Another important is that we are producing teachers. So even teachers for the high schools. So we are the people who, this sector which are producing all the career launch preparation and the teachers. Extremely important sector, and of course the researchers, entrepreneurs, and they are there. So very important. That's why, and a lot of key stakeholders. We alone, government alone is not sufficient. The stakeholders are colleges, universities, AICT, UGC, NBA, and of course the students. So it is important that all these sectors, all these stakeholders come together, sit together, and discuss and find out a way ahead, which can best contribute to the ultimately to the national wealth. One more example I will give. If you see the history, at the 17th century, 18th century, the per capita income, the ratio of the developing country and developed country and developing country was hardly 3:1, 18th century. Now it is 70:1. Huge divergence, 3:1 to 70:1. And what is the reason? The main reason for this divergence is the technology. Is the industrial revolution, is the technology used by those developed countries. So based on only on the technology, they have grown so high. So you can imagine how much important the technology, the entrepreneurship to make a nation grow, to add to the national wealth. It is extremely important. And taking this all in view, nowadays, earlier technical education was not getting that much attention from the government. Now government of India, government of Odisha, and all the state governments are giving adequate attention. Government of India has come up with a separate plan itself under RUSA, RUSA, Rashtriya Shiksha Yojana, and a huge plan to make a investment, and not only investment, there are 4 angles. So the 4 key components, you have to access, equity, excellence, and leadership. These all 4 factors are very, very important, and now RUSA program is already being launched. Various departments and including us, we are also already preparing our action plans we are submitting, and now MHRD will be scrutinizing those action plans, and I think the scheme will be getting approved. So before we really implement RUSA, it is important that we do our homework correctly. Otherwise, the whole investment may not give the right result. So keeping all these things in view, we thought that we should organize a conference, organize a seminar with all the key stakeholders, and listen to them, hear them, take their wisdom, and prepare a road map ahead and see how best we can do. And that's why I will stop here. Now I will invite our Professor Chand to present a small presentation of the key features and the key preparations that Department is making for the coming decade for the technical education. That will be around 15-20 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman AICTE Professor S.S. Mantha, PT Government of Odisha Dr. Kumar, Vice Chancellor VSSVT Burla Professor Nanda, esteemed delegates, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you. I feel highly privileged to have been given this opportunity to present before this August gathering a brief overview of the technical education scenario of the state of Odisha, how it all began more than 60 years back, how it developed to small steps in the early years, how it blossomed into its present status where it has occupied a major segment in the higher education sector, and then how we are going to, or what steps we are going to take to give it a better future. To trace the history of technical education in the state, I would like to take you back in time to Odisha in 1955, that 8 years after independence. And the state still remains basically an agrarian state with virtually no presence of industry. The only significant engine structure at the time was the world famous Hirakud Dam. And at the foot of this Hirakud Dam came up the first engineering college of the state, that is University College of Engineering Burla, which has now been renamed as Bir Surendra Sai University of Technology Burla and has become a unitary university. 5 years later, 1961, at the bold initiative of the immortal and indomitable Sri Biju Patnaik, the Regional Engineering College was set up at Rourkela, which has developed by leaps and bounds and has come to occupy a place of eminence among the institutes of national importance under the dynamic leadership of the present director, Professor Sarangi, who is present here on the dais. And then there was a lull, almost a dormant phase in the field of technical sector. We have to wait for 20 years till in 1981, government set up an engineering college in capital itself, College of Engineering and Technology, which was initially under OUT but has now become a constituent college of BPUT. Next year, 1982, government set up another technical institute, this time in the Talcher Angul Industrial Belt, in the name Indira Gandhi Institute of Technology, Sharan. This is an autonomous institute with a board of governors headed by none other than the Honorable Minister of ETD Department, Government of Odisha. Private engineering college started coming up, starting college was set up, but the number grew exponentially, particularly in the latter part of 1990s and early part of 2000s. And then a need was felt, and government took another big initiative by setting up the BPUT, Biju Patnaik University of Technology at Rourkela in 2002. The basic objective was to bring all these mushrooming colleges under one umbrella, to have a common curriculum and uniform system of evaluation. At the beginning, the university came in 2002 with 27 number of colleges, 32,000 number of students and 1,500 number of teachers. And as the things stand now, we have got 155 number of colleges, 1.1 lakh number of students and 7,000 number of teachers. Significant growth in the technical education sector. Government has also recently set up new engineering colleges, the Pala Maharaj Engineering College at Barampur in 2009, the Government College of Engineering Kalahandi at Bhawanipatna in 2009 again, and in 2011, government took over the old OSME Keonjhar as Government College of Engineering Keonjhar in 2011. Now this gives a brief overview of the physical status as it stands now for physical education in Odisha. There is only one technical university, BPUT. There is a Unity University, BSSUT Burla. There are 5 government engineering colleges, 2 professional colleges. The total seats in BTech in government institutes stands at 3,075, MTech seats 398, and professional seats in 1980. Whereas the seats in BTech in private institutes stands at 42,000 for 2,769, MTech 2,588. Now let us have a close look at this technical education state and examine it through a SWOT analysis. The strength here is the state of Odisha is endowed with rich mineral resources, so this can attract huge investments in various industrial sectors. Secondly, we have got a very stable state government that promotes academic and administrative reforms. We have got the presence of top-ranking national institutes like IIT Bhubaneswar, NIT, NIJR, etc. There is presence of central PSUs like NALCO, RSP, Hall, MCL and others. There is also a growing culture of entrepreneurship among the budding technocrats. And the significant contribution has come from the private sector. This has helped in capacity expansion and growth of technical education in the state in a very large manner. And then finally growth of IT industry in the state. On the weakness we have got a number of them, of course, like BPUT Odisha is already overburdened with more than 150 affiliated colleges. There is no lack of faculty training institutes to create master trainers. A good number of private institutes have poor infrastructure and facilities. In rural Odisha, there is very low density of technical education. More than 40% of intake capacity remains unutilized. They are not getting filled. Technical students have poor abilities in soft skills, and a large percentage are considered to be not employable. Weak campus placement activities in government colleges and inadequate research and development activities. These are things that are hampering the progress. But there is still opportunity. We can make Bhubaneswar, as our minister and chief minister, they said Bhubaneswar could emerge as a quality hub for technical education like other major metros. The presence of large industrial houses and PSUs offer scope for participation in technical education sector, related to expansion and creation of new facilities and capacities. And there is already available a sizable talent pool of technically qualified youth. Threats also come from certain sectors like over-commercialization of technical education, which is already happening, or we fear it is happening. Then ongoing economic downturn may cause closure of a number of financially unsustainable institutes due to very low capacity utilization, which might send a wrong signal to potential investors. With this sort of understanding, and in view of rapid industrialization in the state and globalization of the economy, a need was felt by the government to improve technical education system and create efficient and accessible labor markets for all the skill categories, for all the industries that are going to come up. And government was created in a very significant initiative, a new department in February 2012 in the name and style of Employment and Technical Education and Training. The reason for this is to make it a world-class brand name for improving technical manpower needed in industry and academia, to create wealth and prosperity in the society through application of technical knowledge. It has got the mission of making the places of teaching intellectually stimulating and emotionally pleasurable for the students and the faculty involved. It ensures proficiency of students in the domain of study as well as in soft skills. And we have developed a broad strategy like ensuring an appropriate and world-class curriculum, effective teaching, and a rational examination system. Secondly, supporting and creating centers of excellence for fundamental and industrial research that could benchmark as the best in the business. Establishing partnerships with progressive industries for addressing major industrial problems. And finally, joining hands with innovative academic institutions for improving teaching and research standards. The goals of the department can be outlined like this: to achieve a 40% increase in GER, gross enrollment ratio, by 2017, further 40% increase by 2022, to achieve 40% higher enrollment for rural students, each by 2017 and 2022. Similarly, 40% increase for SC/ST students, 40% increase for SC/ST girl students, 40% for differently able students, and to have 10% of engineering institutes qualify for autonomous status by 2020. And finally, to establish a research university and make it fully functional by 2017. These goals are in line with the basic objectives of RUSA that ask for equity and access. The RUSA, as you know, this is Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. It is a central sponsored scheme which aims at strategic intervention for the improvement of, as I said, access, equity and quality in Indian higher education that focus on state universities and state institutions, and it is spread over 2 5-year plan periods. The government of Odisha has adopted this and has taken all initiatives to take advantage of this RUSA and has set up some priority areas for implementation under this scheme, like setting up a research university at DHSS UT Burla, or converting this university, which already enjoys the unitary status, to a research university. Then setting up a cluster university, and CET Bhubaneswar has been chosen to be upgraded as a cluster university. Then strengthening of BPUT, capacity expansion, faculty development, academic reforms, research innovations. Under strengthening of BPUT, these are the various initiatives that have been already placed for implementation. Functioning of 4 zonal centers to decentralize administrative examination, student grievances and redressal. Because as I said, it is already overburdened with so many colleges coming under this fold. Then functioning of state-of-art computer center and central library, establishment of smart classrooms, connecting all the colleges constituent and affiliated through video conferencing, functioning of online grievance redressal system, functioning of central placement cell, developing the students' common facilities, and finally promoting institute-industry interactions. Under capacity expansion, steps have already been taken to create best-in-class infrastructure with modern classrooms, high-tech labs, Wi-Fi campus, high-speed internet access, hostels, auditoriums in all the existing government colleges. And government has also plans to establish 5 new engineering and professional colleges in the unrepresented, undivided districts of the state. Faculty development. Faculty, as you all know, is a backbone of the educational movement. And a number of initiatives have already been taken, like arranged regular refresher courses as per UGC and AICTE norms for faculty members, teachers training and orientation and quality improvement courses, creation of more PG and PhD programs in the state institutions, setting up R&D laboratories for extensive research activities of PG and PhD students as well as by the local industries. A number of steps have already been taken for academic reforms, like accreditation of all academic programs in all the government institutes have been made mandatory. We have in place a well-structured and progressive curriculum which gets regularly updated. There is a non-negotiable academic calendar already implemented. Then for reforms in the examination system, we have got barcoded OMR-based answer books to expedite the evaluation and publication of result. CCTV cameras have been installed in all the exam centers for effective surveillance, online registration facilities for students, and there is a provision for weaker students to pursue the course at a more comfortable pace by choice-based credit system. And research and innovations, steps have already been taken to modernize the laboratories with present generation equipments, putting emphasis on cross-disciplinary research in cutting-edge technologies, collaborative arrangements with state-based central PSUs, state PSUs, private industries and other R&D establishments, setting up centers of excellence at BSSU Burla in electrical engineering, at CET Bhubaneswar in mechanical engineering, and at IIT Sarang in civil engineering. There is also plan to build a science and technology entrepreneurship park at Deputy campus, Raurkela. Along with this, there is a need to improve the governance. Faculty governance, staff governance, student governance, these various components, and the purpose is to bring them together. They must converge and complement each other. Good governance practices boost the morale of the government and create commitment of the staff concerned towards organizational objectives. Good governance is the culmination of all good practices in administration, management, human resource management, and employee welfare. And here the ICT plays a crucial role. Leveraging ICT into governance practice makes it more transparent, user-friendly, and faster for implementation. Side by side, we also consider to take initiative to develop the leadership among the vice chancellors, directors, administrators, and principals of various engineering colleges for effective administration and governance through appropriate training inputs. The state government has approved a major scheme with a capital outlay of 300 crores for infrastructure development of government technical universities and colleges during a period of 2013-14 to 16-17, and it is planned to almost double the intake capacity at UG and PG level from 3017 in 2012 and 13 to 6328 during 16-17. This can show a pictorial representation of the government support that has ushered in to make up the critical gap of infrastructure of engineering professional colleges and to improve the quality. The following state plan support has been made from almost negligible amount in 2009 and 10. This was increased to 8.25 crores in 2010-11, got doubled in 11-12, again got doubled in 2012-13, again got doubled almost in 2013-14, and now it has been planned to increase it 3 times to almost 200 crores in the year 2014-15. And these are the major targets and financial outlays proposed under RUSA. We have proposals for new universities, conversion of colleges to cluster universities, infrastructure grants to universities, and infrastructure grants to colleges, to government polytechnics, and the final amount stands at a huge 2,686 crore rupees. All these measures and initiatives are expected to usher in a balanced socio-economic growth in the state through industrialization, appropriate harnessing of natural resources, and maximizing the employment potential of the local workforce. And should we not then look forward to a bright future of technical education scenario in Odisha? I think the answer should be yes. With this I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chan, for a very informative presentation and sticking to time. Now we'll invite Professor Mantha, AICT Chairman, to share his ideas and mind with you. And let me inform that when I was discussing with Professor Mantha, the Professor Mantha has been one of the longest serving chairman of ICT, and during his tenure, I am actually observing for last 2 years. He has brought a lot of reforms in ICT. He tried to streamline many activities in ICT. We must hear him, and we should know how we can best implement his ideas and practices. So it is a good opportunity, and I express my sincere thanks to Professor Mantha for coming in. Thank you.
A very good morning to you all and Dr. Chandrasekhar Kumar, Commissioner and Secretary, Employment and Technical Education Training Department, Odisha Government, Professor Nanda, Professor Chan, and Dr. Sunil Kumar Sarangi. My friends on the other side of the dais, some of you I have met, probably every year we will be meeting you, and all the invited guests. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be here, and would like to share a few thoughts of mine with you in terms of governance, which is a part of the overall theme subject for the day, and also about technical education. As I see, we can always have differences, but that's about the growth which happens. Growth always happens through differences, and if every one of us were to agree on everything, then we don't need you, you don't need me. So therefore, we need to look at the need as it exists and as it evolves over a period of time. Now, to start with something on the theme of the day of governance, I would like to inform you, which you all must have used as at the other end. I have implemented, you have used, and over a period of 5 years now, we have also kept changing the process to something that's extremely user representative and user friendly. Also, I would like to believe we didn't have anything. The fundamental part of governance is how do you reach that cutting edge, the person who is actually going to use it at the end of the day. Now, if you can reach him, with the perception that he has, then probably you have won half the battle. The other half of the battle is the delivery of that system. In the early days, we are even today, many of the applications, we still have transactional approach to most of our initiatives, most of our activities. In AICTE also, about 5 years back, we had purely transactional approach. I want the service, you deliver the service, and that's it. That's the end of the story. Now what happens in this kind of approach is there is a lot of scope for built-in corruption. So transactional methodologies will need to move out from being transactional to being process-driven. So therefore, all activities that deliver services at the cutting edge need to be driven by robust processes. So a process can be logically decoded and the process can be delivered by a set of rules. Transactions don't need rules. So therefore, or conversely, transactions over a period of time can keep evolving and keep changing in terms of their delivery and in terms of their rules. Therefore, you will have a tremendous amount of scope to build in corruption into the system. So you need to move out from that, make it process driven, which means you have to define processes, which means you have to come back to drawing board stage and define what are your inputs, what are your expected outcomes, and in order to deliver from these inputs to these expected outcomes, what is the process that you have, or what is the process that you would want to develop, and that process needs to be coded logically, in an algorithmic fashion. It needs to be expanded. And then you go back to the drawing board, look at what kind of inputs need to change, and so on. So over an iterated process, you will find that you zero in on the inputs, on the outcomes, and also on the process. So that's what we have tried to do in the e-governance project. Today we have about 12,000 institutions. Their complete database is there on the portal. You all know what kind of data you input as institutions. And as an outcome parameter, I'll tell you that the institutional database of all these 12,000 is there in the public domain today. Any of your document can be seen in the public domain. The application is completely RTI compliant. Now tell me how many processes, how many developments in the government sector are actually RTI compliant. Now I have 10 million student database on the portal. Okay? 10 million student database on the portal. Every student has a unique ID. I can send an SMS or a mail to every one of my students within seconds. Similarly, I have 6 lakh faculty on the portal, and each faculty has a unique ID. I can reach each one of them. In fact, every institution gets its data through the portal. You get all the updates, all the status positions through SMS, through mail, to your ID. Now that's the cutting edge. Now what happens at the back end to make all this happen is a robust process. And that's what I've been talking about. In fact, I have 8 terabyte data on the portal, on the data, in the data center that I have. Okay, 8 terabyte. Now, to manage all this data, I have a business intelligence tool which creates reports on the fly. If I want any report as to find out how many institutions are there in Orissa, in which district, how many polytechnics are there, in those polytechnics, how many teachers are there, what qualifications they have, everything I can get on the fly from real-time data through my business intelligence report. Now that's the kind of e-governance one should aim at, and you will automatically find that the corruption levels become zero. Today, you can apply sitting at home for a new institution or provide for a service to an existing institution. We provide several services. Sitting at home, you can make an application and your final approval letter you can print sitting at home. Nobody comes to my office except when there is a serious issue. They don't come. I have 10 regional offices, but many of them don't even go there. So therefore, that's the kind of e-governance that we require. And I just wanted to inform you because that happens to be the theme of the day. Now, having said that, I would invite all the institutions here to mandatorily implement ERP solutions in their institutions so that they become, it's not enough to maintain a website. Website doesn't provide you anything. So therefore, you need to make them interactive, provide downstream activities for your users through your portal. So that's what we are supposed to do. Now coming back to technical education, there has been a lot of expansion in the last 5 years. And the two most important paradigms that we need to look at is access and the other is quality. Access with quality. Now when we look at access, I'll draw upon some of my understanding on these two subjects and see what is actually happening in the country today, including Odisha. When I say access, 5 years back when I joined, in the technical education space, I had 5.5 lakh students enrollment in technical education. 5 years back, 5.5 lakhs was the enrollment. In 13-14, I have an enrollment of 1.26 million. So it has more than doubled in 5 years' time. Which means that every one of you had a contribution in that growth factor. Why? Because in the last 5 years, the paradigm has really shifted from being a purely government-driven activity in the early days to now a private enterprise-driven activity. Today, you have 93% of technical education in the private sector. It's a very good thing to happen. The private sector has to come into almost every single area to promote the growth factor of the country. Now that has happened, including this state. But having said that, there are several other features which have come in. The rate of growth of enrollment has been very, very significant over the last 5 years. Today people are saying that there are vacancies. I mean, there was a slide which said some 35-40% vacancies or something. The national average for vacancies is about 20 to 25. The national average is about 20 to 25% vacancies. Now if you look at a single factor of rate of growth which has really grown, from 5.5 to 1.26 billion. If there are vacancies at the end of the day, why should I be bothered? I mean, look at the paradigm. I'll give you 3-4 reasons as to why I need not be bothered. You may have a different view. I'll come to that view as well. As long as there is a rate of growth that is happening, the bad ones will close, the better ones will prevail, quality will prevail. So what is wrong with that paradigm? Right? Now, suppose somebody says, don't let new colleges come in, don't give approvals to new colleges, because there are vacancies in the existing colleges. Right? I'll give you a parallel to this. About 15-20 years back, we had just about 2 models in automobiles. One was the Ambassador by the Hindustan Motors, and the other was Padmini by Fiat. After that, things have changed. Today you have more than 100 models, and every one of us wants a new model. I mean, there are people, there is a part of society in this world, in this country as well, which says every 6 months I'll change my vehicle. Right? They can afford to do it today because they are available, and these people have the means to do it. Right? So today, if let's say a company comes forward, maybe Hindustan Motors or Mahindra's or whatever, goes to the regulator. There are regulators in every field. It's not that things are just free, free enterprise everywhere. There is a regulator everywhere. So the automobile manufacturers, they go to the regulators and say, so many models are there, we are not able to sell our models. Why do you bring in new models into the market? Don't allow new models to come in. Will it work? Right? So you want a free enterprise, you want your institution to come up. Had the logic been that no institute will come up when you wanted to set up an institution, what would you have done? You would have gone to court. And what is the argument that you would have had? Section 19G of the Constitution says that I can set up, I can practice any profession that I want. It is my money that I am putting in. It is my land that I am putting in. There is no government source available here. And I am willing to follow all the rules of the regulator. Then the court would say, "Bhaiya, aapko problem kya hai? Why do you stop this fellow?" In fact, there have been cases where the courts have said, if there is a non-performing institute, to go after them. Why do you presuppose that a new institution will not provide quality? So therefore, you look at different perspectives of the problem. As a policy, if I come down and say that no new colleges, no expansion in this country this year, okay, which may even happen because of different forces acting in the current environment. What would those people do who have invested money and so on? Think about it. Now the third argument on this. What is our GER today? The national GER is 19 today. 18.8 is the national GER. I've been asking your secretary as to what the GER in Orissa would be. Maybe 14, 15, whatever. Out of 19 GER, today the technical education, what is GER? Gross enrollment ratio, measured between all those eligible students who go to higher education in the age group of 18 to 23. Some places it's 22, 23, but around that, right? So between 18 to 23, if there are 100 students available who are eligible to go to higher education, today in India only 19 go there, right? And out of that 19, 5 points, 4.5 points is provided by technical education. out of that 19, the contribution of technical education is 4.5. In translated in terms of numbers, what happens? This 19 GER, it translates to 25 million students getting into colleges. And the total number of students who get into giving examinations between 10th, 11th, 12th is 50 million, which means the passing rate is about 50%, which is a national average. Right? So 50 million students appear for exams, 25 million pass, and they go ahead. Which means every year, 25 million students drop out between 10th, 11th, 12th, and so on. Two main reasons. They don't have the money to continue higher education. They have to support their families, so therefore they have to drop out. Many of them cannot do studies in the evening and not enough opportunities, all that. And the second main reason is they don't have any interest in the kind of education that is happening today. Your art, science, commerce, engineering, medicine, they are not interested in that. Right? So therefore, whatever is the reason, 25 million students are dropping out. Right? Therefore, what should you do? This 25 million, which is actually getting into colleges, is contributing to your 19 GER. Now, if we want a national GER, as my colleague pointed out, of 40, what should we do? How many more students will have to come into colleges? Forget about all that. The numbers will be mind-boggling to reach 40 GER of a national level. Suppose I give you a paradigm. Instead of saying that 25 million get into higher education, in a particular year I'll enable the systems so that all 50 million pass. Hypothetical. Right? Instead of 25 million passing, all 50 million pass. Any number who comes in, they pass and go ahead. There will be an incremental change, obviously. More number of people will see colleges. Is that right? Get into colleges. Where will they go? They have to get into your current system, your current arts college, science college, commerce college, engineering college, and so on. If that were to happen, you tell me, do you have enough spare capacity to accommodate all of them even on today's infrastructure that you have? Do you have? Now we are talking about reaching 40 or 30 or whatever. The National Planning Commission figures is reaching 30 by 2020. Do you have in the next, what is 2020, another 5 years? In 5 years, you need to double and maybe even go beyond that only in terms of creating infrastructure to accommodate all these guys. Is that workable? Is that possible? So what are we talking about? On one side we are saying vacancies, no colleges, no expansion, nothing. On the other side increase GER. What is happening? Now, if you are increasing GER, obviously there will be a pressure on the delivery side. Where is the pressure on the supply side? Why are we not coming back to saying that improve the school systems, improve that delivery at that school level, get more students to pass between 10th, 11th and 12th, get the supply side changed, get more people into the system so that you will get more students. Instead of that, what we are saying is, today you create a examination system in such a way that I peg the passing percentage at 50 and then say that look, there are vacancies, and we do neither do anything to the supply side nor do anything to the operating side. So how do you expect your GER to increase? How do you expect more people to come into the system? Or conversely, you forget about the current education system, create a new education system, new education paradigm, that of skill building, skills and education coming together, and provide an alternative education pathway to the students so that there is another education, parallel education system that comes up eventually, which takes care of these students who are dropping out. But either way, you need more infrastructure, you need more resources, you need more, and everything in the next 5 years. So please don't go into that mode of saying, today I don't have students, so therefore you create policies where everything will be stalled. I don't think that's the correct way of looking at things. You have to improve quality. Quality has several parameters. You have to drive towards improving the quality. Quality needs money. I was just making a comment, we spend more than 500 crores per IIT, and we are talking of 5 years, 200 crores, 300 crores for the entire technical education in the state and so on. So therefore, we need to relook at all these paradigms, and unless you put in money, unless you put in resources, quality doesn't rise like that. And you can't say that I have created a quality institution. Quality institutions are not created. Even if you put all the money in the world, you can't create a quality institute. You need quality students. You can't say that from 50% eligibility to 100% eligibility, everybody gets into the system, and then you ask the regulator, what are you doing to the quality? I'll give you a paradigm where quality can be improved in 1 year. I'll raise the bar from 50% to 70%. And anybody who has 70% and above only can get into technical education college. Believe me, the quality will improve. But can that paradigm be sustained by any political dispensation in any state? So therefore, on one side you say that you allow everybody into the college. Everybody should get to become an engineer. So, and once you do that, over a 5-year period, you have some kind of equilibrium that sets in, and the quality operates at some point, and then you say, what are you doing for quality? So these are difficult things to match. So quality doesn't exist end to end. Quality always exists at the top. There is a mid-level which has a potential to reach the top, and there is a level at the bottom where a lot of service inputs are required to improve the quality. So this is not in just education, it is there in every single field. You go to the entertainment sector. Do we even realize how many new channels open every day and how many new channels close? Has anybody gone against that and said why these channels are opening in the first place and why they are closing? But if one management school closes, they will come after AICT. What are you doing? Management school is closing. There are no students. Why are you allowing new college? Here we have a service sector, we have a government-driven paradigm that requires education to be given to everybody. And in that you have a different yardstick, or you want to propose a different yardstick. And in a purely entertainment-driven activity, you don't want any yardstick. Let that be open to the public pressures, the worries of life and so on. So therefore we need to relook all that we are trying to say. Employability, these are all very important activities. On one side we are saying that education should provide for everybody. On the other side we are nicely disconnecting the employment market to the education sector. There is no maintainable labor management information system available in this country even today. 90% of your market is in the unorganized sector. All the skill building, everything that we are talking about is in the organized sector, which is just about 7 to 8%. What are we doing with that unorganized sector? People are saying 25%, 30% engineers are only employable. Do you know what the Ernst & Young report says or the McKinsey report says? In a certain sector, for a certain job role, they advertise and seek applications. From those applications, they find that 25% are acceptable for that job role. Now they say, they use that statement as a yardstick to define the entire sector. Now that's not correct. if I were to look at it from the other perspective, I have, like I said, 1.26 million enrolling today. Even if I have 1 million students passing every year, and if I say 25% is employable, it means 7.5 lakh students every year from the technical education is roaming the streets, no jobs. Now that's not correct. So what must be happening? So they must be getting jobs, but probably undervalued jobs. Right? So therefore, the problem is not of employment, it is underemployment. Because of your such a big unorganized sector. And your lopsided development between your primary job sector, the secondary job sector, the tertiary job sectors, and so on. So we have to relook at our job potential, and therefore see that massive inputs go into that sector where the job positions in the country improve by many factors. We have somehow conveniently forgotten about MSMEs. There is a huge potential in this country for MSME growth. And there is a huge research potential available there. There is a huge job potential available there. But somehow everybody wants a Tata or TCS or Infosys or L&T or Siemens for a job. Nobody talks about even the development patterns that are required, that is required into the MSMEs. As the GDP, gross product, is growing at about 5%. Your rate of population is growing at about 1.5%. What is the difference? 3.5. That 3.5 is a rule for saying that is a percentage at which your per capita income is growing, right? Purchasing power. So that is about 3.5. Your inflation is about 8%. So what is happening? So if this GDP were to still fall, what really happens is people really do not have that money to do anything. So your economy falls, your GDP falls, all that happens. Which means that to stimulate this, your growth on the sector, the industry, the manufacturing, which is the secondary sector, the primary sector, your mining activity, your agriculture, all that has to develop. And your service sector has to develop so that they have a potential of 60-65% jobs. Your manufacturing sector has about 30-35% jobs. Your mining, agriculture, they have a sustained growth of 10-15% jobs and so on. So these things have to grow, but that primary sector and the secondary sector is so important to drive the tertiary sector. If we neglect our manufacturing, then things will die. And if you if you neglect your primary sector, which is so unfortunate in this country, the mining has almost come to a standstill. Now remember, these kind of initiatives will see that your entire economy will collapse someday. So we need to relook at all this. Research, yes, there are a lot of concerns on research. We have analytical research, statistical research, you have anecdotal research, empirical research, you have experimental research. But most of the people today are more interested in doing statistical research and empirical research and so on. Nobody worries about experimental research, and that is where this country suffers. Unless you create a postulation, you also experiment that, create some value addition, put it in the public domain, let it reach the industry. That's something that needs to happen. We had many fundamental institutions doing fundamental research, but they have never gone beyond that point. Today we are talking about research universities, cluster universities, meta universities, and so on. The basic purpose of setting up a university was to create that interplay between different departments and so on, create interdisciplinary research, multidisciplinary research and so on. Somewhere we have failed in that. Today our departments are single teacher departments, 10 student departments in university, many departments are like that. You all must be knowing. And there is no interaction, no research, nothing. And suddenly we find that after 50 years there is no research happening. So create a research university. Now this is, so you strengthen the base systems, strengthen the ground, then things will be built on that. If you are only looking at the Western paradigms, then it becomes extremely difficult to operate. Now meta universities, people say you will get a degree from here, 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 here. But look at the logistics, look at the operational difficulties. But whoever prevented a single university from doing all that a meta university is supposed to be doing. So we need to relook at our systems. We have in this country 640 districts, out of which approximately 640, out of which about 200 districts have no technical education, not a single institution. Okay? Why? What kind of growth are we talking about? Expansion, access, all kinds of things we talk. But what is happening at the ground level? Now most of these states are terror prone. Not a single entrepreneur wants to go there. They all want to set up something in Bhubaneswar, something in Cuttack, something in, and so on. But if somebody would say that you go to a tribal place, set up an engineering institute, would you do it? But in city you will go and you will keep playing games saying that now don't allow new college here, now you don't do this, don't do that. But if you are told to please go there, there are no institutions there. In the entire northeast there are many states without any infrastructure. Well, nobody would go there. So there is a lot of thinking which has to change, and a government intervention would be required at certain places, a private intervention would be required at some places, and both of them have to come together to drive this paradigm. Finally, we need to, the change can be created, the change can be obtained through two processes. You change, you drive a change by change, which means don't go to drawing board. Those classic methods are all there. You create a plan, you could do this, you do this, do this, do this. 5-year plans, many of our 5-year plans are spent like that. Nothing happens. So you drive change by change. You say that this is what I want and drive every activity towards that. You will achieve much better results than change by design, by plan, and so on. So the only message that I have for whatever it is worth is we need to create systems which are facilitating enough, which have passion. People work with passion, but not just passion. Mere passion without logic is useless. You'll end up doing more harm. So therefore, there need to be people, there need to be mavericks, there need to be an understanding that failure is a part of success, and drive systems by change. Thank you.
And before we close this session, we will have a few questions we'll take, and then we'll go for the next session. So we'll take just 2-3 questions because we're running, and we can take more in the last session. So just 2-3 questions if some questions there.
Honorable Justice Ranganath Mishra and AICT, I think it was coordinating. So I want to point out here that we are one of the states who have a professional educational act, but there should be a centralized act, sir, and a centralized fee structure committee to check commercialization and exploitation. So can you please throw some light on this aspect, sir?
As an activity, there is a committee which was headed, like you said, by Shri Ranganath Mishra, but that had only submitted some interim report, and currently it is still pending. there is no final report that has come, and now you know Ranganathan Mishra is no more. So we need to relook at the whole thing. But having said that, that's the administrative part. The second part is, see, in a purely enterprise-driven system, you can only have guidelines. You cannot, I mean, this country has too many rules and too many regulations and too much of restrictions. Any restriction that you put, people will be there to break it, and therefore the bad practices come in. So you should free the system as much as is possible. But having said that, there is a class of society which needs to be protected. So therefore you need very strong guidelines. The standards of living, the cost factors that go into providing an activity are very different across the country. So therefore I don't think there is one single fee which will stand in the entire country or every single place. So therefore we need to relook at this and see what kind of initiatives are required.
Departments, all the experts, all the research persons. And also it is allowed that any research person of every field can take a research scholar from or can guide any project or can handle any project of different wing also. It is allowed. So when you are looking for the experts for a specific reason, why not it should be open for all the persons of all the wings? It shouldn't be restricted to a specific, say, mechanical wing professor or mechanical field project you are not taking for electrical or computer science people. But at the same time that mechanical expert will take or guide the persons of all such wings, if you consider for the PhD. So similarly, it should be open for all. Thank you.
That research in that specific area also is required. So there needs to be a judicial mix, and that comes from the leaders of the universities, the vice chancellors and so on. They need to set the objectives for the university, saying that in this area we will do so much of development, and it's really up to them to fix the objectives for the university over the next 3 years, 4 or 5 years and so on, and say what kind of research is required and how much of that can be interdisciplinary, how much, ultimately everything needs funding. So it also depends on funding. And merely saying that a mechanical engineer looking at an interdisciplinary project should be able to guide everybody, that doesn't happen like that. There are experts in every single area, and all these people need to come together to create an interdisciplinary. So therefore, it depends on what kind of project you envisage, and then work downwards, find out what kind of people are required, put a team together, and so on.
Speakers for such an informative and an enlightening session. We take this opportunity to felicitate the speakers with mementos. I would request for the mementos. Request Dr. C.S. Kumar to felicitate D.K. Nanda, Professor Chand, Professor Sanangi, Professor Chand. And we would request Professor Mantha to kindly felicitate Dr. C.S. Kumar for being the driving force behind the session.
Oh,